Sandoval County Commissioner Jay Block is the first Republican in as the New Mexico GOP looks to unseat Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham. The conservative Air Force veteran and nuclear consultant announced his candidacy last weekend. Now that a cabinet post isn't apparently in the offing for our governor, the next election is a year and a half away. That's pretty quick. Here to look at where things stand for candidates and the parties is the Line Opinion Panel. Former state senator and Line regular Diane Snyder returns. Good to see you as always. Another Line regular, UNM law professor Serge Martinez is back with us as well. Welcome to you, Serge. And founder of Vox Optima Public Relations, Merritt Allen, our good friend from the East Mountains, joins us as well. Now, Republicans are desperate to win this election. Diane, I want to start with you, but they don't hold any statewide offices currently. And it's not clear that there's a big name on the bench currently. What's a smart strategy for the GOP going forward in the next year and a half?
The thing I think you hit right on the secret and of what the problem is there's no one on the bench waiting. Mm-hmm. We have some a little distance back. We have I believe Kelly Fajardo is a very attractive candidate to me for the future. I'm not sure if she's quite ready to go statewide or not because she's very well known in her district, which is the Los Lunas Belen area, but I'm not sure. But there and Rebecca, I'm sorry, her name went right out of my head. But there are several legislators.
Rebecca Dow.
Thank you, Rebecca Dow. There are several legislators, I believe, Republican legislators that I believe have a very strong future. But I think there's been too much focus on, and this is terrible to say, but on the has-beens, on the Steve Pierces and the John Sanchez's but the thing we have to do, because we saw in the U.S. Senate race, we saw an unknown political figure, but a well-known individual in Mark Ronchetti almost do very, very well in that Senate race against a difficult and very strong opponent. So I don't think we have someone quite like that at this point. I think that Martin CD1 race, but I think we don't have a plan. Yeah. At least I haven't heard one.
Merritt, I ask you to pick up on that interesting point there made by Senator that, the fresh face theorem is a little lacking for the party. And what does the party do when a fresh face only has a year and a half to emerge? That's not going to happen. This is the cards that you have, the deck that you have. So what's the play here?
I think the real question is not party unity, because we've not had that for some time, and I don't think we will in 2022. And the issues that face the New Mexico Republican Party or New Mexico Republican Party candidates really reflect Republican candidates everywhere in 2022. There are kind of strata or layers of candidates. I think Trumpism definitely affects candidates. I would put Jay Block squarely in what I call Trump mid. He's kind of with Senators Hawley and Cruz. He's to the right of Steve Pierce for sure. I don't think he's counting on a lot of support from the state party. He's quite right wing. He has only won local election, 2 of those, so he's fairly new on the scene. And he's got a platform and a mindset that would win a primary, but I don't think a statewide race. So I think it would take, just given the tempo in New Mexico right now, what I would consider a moderate or at the most conservative, a Trump light. Sure. And that would be Steve Pierce or more center. Do those candidates really want to waste their shot in 2022, or are they going to wait until 2026? And I think that's the question. And that's where the Rebecca Dows, who I think is absolutely the strongest candidate we have. She's won 3 elections. She's turned 2 other districts red and majority blue districts. Crystal Diamond picking up John Arthur Smith's seat. Luis Terrazas picking up House District 39, which has almost never been Republican. That's the mining district. That's where Salt of the Earth was filmed. I mean, come on.
That's right.
You don't get more blue than that. Rebecca Dow gets things done. She works across the aisle. She's got early childhood chops. She made redistricting happen when it just wasn't going to. She pulled that out almost single-handedly. She has the chops. Is she going to try with all the money that the governor's pulling in 2022? Is she going to wait until 2026? I think that's the question. There's a list of candidates, and I think they can easily, be put into kind of the spectrum of moderate to Trump max. You've got Karen Bedonie just declared yesterday. She's got a video out. I think she's further into Trumpism than Jay Block. She's very, very, I would say, in the Lori Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene category.
Really?
So I don't think she has a terrific chance. So I think there will be a number of candidates in the primary. And the question is, who wins the primary, and do they go so far right that they have a chance of winning the general election?
Good points there. I really like that riff. Hey, Serge, we see splits in party politics all the time. Democrats have their own, progressives, we know that's there. Republicans, nationally, we just heard from Merritt about the Trump factor, but here in New Mexico, there's long been a Martinez-Pierce split, with Mr. Pierce being the more conservative, and now in lockstep with Mr. Trump, as we just heard. From an outsider's perspective, do you see this as a normal political evolution, or is there a sign of trouble here for Republicans?
I think, anytime you're the party who's out of power, there's the risk of this, the circular firing squad setup that I'm seeing, that I'm hearing from Merritt talking about, folks trying to figure out who's the more Trump, who's the least Trump, and how everyone fits in that sort of vein, and taking shots at each other maybe. But I think the excuse me. The pull towards the center is the one that makes the most sense for a general election, and I can't imagine any sort of smart strategy that tries to push further away from that. But I do see, the primary poll that takes folks away from that is a real thing, and as we see more and more of that, I think I don't really know that there's a solution between what makes sense generally and what makes sense at the primary level, but I do find it to be a really fascinating phenomenon.
Let me ask Senator about that. Is there a Mitt Romney light on the horizon here in New Mexico? There's someone that can attract votes from across the aisle? Because you're going to have to do that to win in this state, given voter registration numbers, et cetera, et cetera. You know what I'm saying?
I think that goes back to what Merritt said, is Rebecca Dow. She has proven that she can work across the aisles and get things accomplished. I don't see it in any of the leading contenders. Winning a local county race is very important at the time for the county, but that's a big difference than trying to win a statewide race. A statewide race is hard, and I don't know whether, as was said earlier by Merritt, is whether Rebecca's willing to give up her seat now, or does she want to build up a few more chops? And I think she has the potential. I see her being governor at some point, I guess is what I'd like to say.
Interesting. Merritt, we're going to finish up here. Just got a minute left. The idea that, for Republicans, raising money is another specter out there. Can money be raised for these races?
Oh, absolutely. And Rebecca is brilliant at that. And, Steve Pierce is treasurer of the RNC, largely because of his fundraising capability. The question is, who does he choose to give the money to?
How about our current governor, Serge? What do you think? Who took in $250,000 over roughly 6-month period, our most recent checkpoint. Is she going to stem the tide here from the Republican assault just through money alone? Is that going to be enough?
I think she's definitely riding high, and I would, of all the folks that we've talked about, I don't know who would want to jump into that ring facing that opposition. I think, I think that probably would scare off a lot of people, and understandably so.
Gotcha. We'll have to leave that there for now. We'll hear from the governor, though, in just a moment. This group is Talking New Mexico True when we come back.